Well, Marty, I've been called lots of things, but I don't think I've been called the Right Reverend before. And as Jan whispered to me, Marty sometimes gets it wrong. Many years ago, I was a service manager at a Toyota and Mercedes-Benz dealership. And part of my job there was that I had to liaise very closely with the finance manager. Finance manager, middle-aged lady, very personable. She and I got along really well. But I had this weird thing happen. Every time I would approach her office to sit and have a chat about business stuff, I'd recognise my heart rate would go up, as it is now, by the way. My heart rate would go up, my breathing would become shallow, and my breathing would be very rapid. And I knew when I went to the office, this is what would happen. And I had no idea why. Talk about being self-aware. I had no idea why. Anyway, many years later, I was talking to my counselling supervisor, and I happened to mention to her that I said, I have this weird thing that when I'm around women in the position of authority, I get this response. And she just looked at me and said, Lindsay, tell me about your primary school headmistress. And I just literally blurted out, you mean Miss Hart? And she said, yes. And I said, I was terrified of her. Ding! I mightn't be the brightest light on the Christmas tree, but I did join those dots up. That two women in position of authority, one terrified a little boy that was still in here, and the other woman totally innocent, but I would get the same reaction when I approached her. Next time I was in that sort of position with a woman in authority, no reaction. I was very, very fortunate, and I want to emphasise this, I was very fortunate that simply bringing it from here out here was enough for me in the moment that, hey, I've joined the dots up, I don't need to be scared. And what I didn't realise that little boy was, and I use this word very carefully, that little boy was traumatised. Not in a dramatic way. Miss Hart never abused me as such, but she had I can remember my mum talking about her, she had a presence about her. Now I've just used the word trauma, so when I'm using that word, because now it's stretched to mean just about anything, any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, dissociation, confusion, or other disruptive feelings intense enough to have a long-lasting effect, negative effect on a person's attitude, behaviour, and other aspects of functioning. Now that negative effect on me, thanks Dean, you can take that off. That negative effect on me was, compared to a lot of trauma, absolutely minuscule, but it was enough to mess me around. Now the other thing I just mentioned is these two women were both in positions of authority. So if I can have the definition of authority up, Dean. The legitimate power or right to give orders, make decisions and enforce compliance. Now both of these women had legitimate authority. Absolutely nothing wrong with them having that authority. Nothing wrong with them at all. But sometimes people in positions of legitimate authority abuse that power. And you're probably sitting there going, ding, yes, I remember. And people in positions of power, I've observed, or in positions of authority, I should say, with power, sometimes abuse it for all sorts of reasons. It could be simply that they are people that they like to feel the power. And that could be coming from their past, could be all sorts of reasons for that. And it could be very, very deliberate, through to something like just a subconscious need to be in control of everything. And they may not even know they're doing it. I'm not excusing the behaviour, I'm just mentioning that. So if you're sitting there thinking, yeah, I've got some of that going on, I think this is touching a nerve. I just want to assure you that this is a safe place. I'm not going to be going into anything too deep. Dare I use the word traumatic? I'm going to be talking about David and Saul, and I'm going to spring a surprise on a couple of guys here. Dean, can you come up here, mate? It'll only be for a couple of seconds, all right? And can I have you up here? You're the hero, by the way, mate. All right. Okay, over here. And I want you to stand down there deliberately, and I want you to look at the mob, right? When I'm talking about Saul, I want you to think of this guy, right? Head and shoulders above us, right? Head and shoulders. That's how he was described, big boy. 30-year-old guy made king. And this is David, who, when he meets Saul, he's actually a lad. I mean, you knocked off Goliath, so that's pretty good. You can grab your seat. So when I'm talking about Saul and David, if you can have that sort of picture in mind, right? Big guy and a youth. Actually, if you can go, oh, you've got it there. Chapters 16 to 17 in 1 Samuel. I'm actually not going to be reading much straight out of the text, because otherwise we would be here for 3 hours, and that might be okay in Uganda or Rwanda. In fact, that would probably be a bit short, but here you're probably going to walk out on me. So I'm just going to go through and skim through this between Saul and David. In the times of the Old Testament, the king had absolute authority. In 1 Samuel, you can read the story of Saul being anointed king. As I said, he was a 30-year-old, and he's anointed king. I want you to hold on to that word anointed, that he's anointed king. Saul has some mental health issues, and he says to his crew, his court, can you find somebody that plays some really good music? Right? So somebody says, know this young lad, David, great harpist. He's actually a warrior as well, so let's get him in. So they get Dave in. Dave comes and he plays the harp for Saul, and Saul becomes calm. In the process of this, David becomes connected to the court of Saul, and he spends his time between Saul and going back to his dad's farm to look after the sheep. And then Goliath comes along. Hero. We all know the story of Goliath. I don't need to go there, I think. Slays the giant. And Saul loves this guy, thinks he's wonderful. But after Goliath is killed, Saul puts David into his army and he promotes him. And the text says, tells us that, and everybody thought that was a really good idea. They really liked David. He was a good leader. He was out the front. And I just stopped myself from making an unhelpful pun there. He was out the front and he was leading well. And Saul becomes literally insanely jealous. It's literally insanely jealous. If you read it, if I can just find it quickly. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his father's house. Whatever Saul sent him to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. That pleased all the people and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home, the Philistine women, from killing the Philistines, the women came out from the towns of Israel to meet Saul, singing and dancing with joyful songs. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s." Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They've credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. He did a lot more than keep a jealous eye on him. There's a couple of times he tried to run him through with a spear. He organises David to go and fight some Philistines with the hope that David will be killed by the Philistines. He organises his men to ambush David in his own house, and his wife helps David escape. Really horrendous stuff. So David's gone from the apple of Saul's eye to being absolutely hated. Saul has all the authority, and he totally abuses that authority to go after David because he's jealous. He's worried that David's going to take the kingdom off him. In one of these, what happens, David escapes the palace and he flees into the desert. And there's strongholds in the desert where he goes and stays. And there's one of these instances where David has fled and Saul is chasing him. David's out of food. He goes to a village of Nob and he approaches the priest in the village. The priest is scared of David, gives him food. Well, he's probably scared of Saul because he knows Saul is after David. Gives David food, and also David was unarmed, so he gives him Goliath's sword. And David goes off. There's a guy there called Doeg who sees this happen. He reports it to Saul, and Saul goes down with a group of soldiers to the village. And in a fit of rage, essentially, he tells his men, wipe the village out. They won't do it, so Doeg actually does it. Really, really horrendous stuff. And we can only imagine what David thought about that when he heard about it, that here I am, I've gone there, they've helped me. Because they've helped me, they've died. The trauma that David must have carried from that. Now, there's an interesting thing that happens while David's being pursued. I love the Bible because of the little bits of humanity it gives you, right? Saul's pursuing David, stops at the sheep pens. There's a cave there, and it says Saul needed to relieve himself. I mean, you don't get much more human than that, do you? And Samuel says Saul needed to relieve himself, so he goes into the cave. What he doesn't know is that in the back of the cave, David and some of his men are already hiding in there, but he doesn't know that. So he goes in. His men nudge David basically and say, here's your chance. So David doesn't attack Saul. He actually takes a bit off his cloak to prove that he could have, and then sneaks back into the cave. And his men said, come on, you can kill him. Now's your chance. Be free of this. Take him out. And David uses this phrase. He says, I will not touch the Lord's anointed. I will not touch the Lord's anointed. Now, I know there's people here from diverse backgrounds theologically. If you've ever had somebody say to you that verse, that saying from David, particularly if a church leader has ever said to you, hey, you can't criticise me because I'm the Lord's anointed, and they're quoting that, I just want to say point blank, that's an atrocious misuse of Scripture. It's an appalling misuse of Scripture. You say, well, why is that? So, well, I don't see anybody here with a sword. Are you going to use a sword against a leader you disagree with? Don't think so. David was talking about physically killing Saul, who had been anointed to be king. And he's saying, no, he was saying really, I'm leaving this in God's hands. I'm not taking it into my hands. I'm leaving it up to God. But that does not mean that you guys cannot critique the church leadership. Sorry, church leadership, guys. I've been there. If you do that, though, can I ask you to actually think before you speak? I've been in church leadership. I've heard some stuff that is like a 2-year-old talking to me. Right? Don't go there. Feel free to express, and I know the leadership here would be open to hearing that. Feel free to express your concerns or whatever, but do it in a way that's polite, that is building up and is looking for true answers. And if you think, well, hang on, Lindsay, this has been drummed into me in another setting, don't touch the Lord's anointed. David later becomes king, and he was anointed to be king. Same process as Saul. He's anointed by the Lord to become king. David, the politest way I could put it, behaves incredibly badly. He sins. Nathan the prophet comes to him and rips into him. Absolutely nails him to the wall for what he's done. David was anointed. Nathan corrects him. And I'm just going to leave that there. So David's this young guy. He's been the apple of Saul's eye. He's become a leader. Everybody admires him, and then Saul turns on him. That sort of betrayal by a leader can do incredibly deep damage. And I just want to say here, if anybody here has been abused like that by any leader, any person in authority, could be your teacher, could be your boss, could be the government if you were on the end of robo-debt. I know somebody that I would be careful in using the word, but borderline traumatised by that process. If you've been in that position, I just want you to let you know that you're not on your own. And I think there's healing that can come out of that. Now, I've mentioned about Doeg and his atrocious behaviour, betraying David and then killing the people, etc. And David's response, if I can have that slide back up with the list of David's responses on it. Really interesting thing David does. In Psalm 52, and there's a list up there of Psalms that David wrote in direct response to those incidences. In Psalm 52, he wrote this about Doeg. Why do you boast of evil, you mighty man? Why do you boast all day long? You're a disgrace in the eyes of God. Your tongue plots destruction. It's like a sharpened razor. You who practice deceit. You love evil rather than good, falsehood rather than speaking the truth. You love every harmful word, O you deceitful tongue. surely God will bring you down to everlasting ruin. And it goes on. You get the gist. David is getting down on paper, on papyrus, probably should say. Probably not vellum at that stage, papyrus, writing it down. And he's just letting the raw emotion out. There's been really interesting research done about doing that when you're dealing with past trauma. There's some really interesting research about writing. And the research indicated that over a 4-day period, if you sat down for 15 to 20 minutes, was what they worked out, and you wrote down about your past hurts, about past trauma, and you did it, if I can put it this way, if you did it from your guts, if you do it as no boundaries on the words you use, it can be whatever language you want to use, getting in touch with your real feelings. And this research showed that if you do this over about 4 days, for a lot of people, it really helped process their past trauma and bring healing. Really interesting research. It's interesting that it's exactly what David's done. He's written it out and he doesn't hold back. A bit of a tool you can use if you want to try doing this, if you're carrying stuff from your past and you want to try this, is to write a letter to the person that's hurt you. And you're sitting there going, no, not doing that. Well, the good news is you're not going to post it. Okay? I probably should have said that first before I saw the eyes. You're not going to post it, right? But you write down everything that's in here. My mum had a saying that I can remember, and I assume came from her Scottish forebears or something. She used to say, Lindsay, you need to get it off your chest. You need to get it, when she could see I was wound up about something, get it off your chest. Ancient wisdom in that. She probably didn't realise, but ancient wisdom. For me, with that moment from my childhood, just talking to the supervisor at the time, that was enough to set me free from it. But there's other things that are a lot deeper, a lot bigger, and it can be a bit like peeling an onion. You take a layer off, think you're okay, take another layer off, think you're okay, and it comes up, and so on. And it's not an event usually, it's usually a longer process. So I'd encourage you that if you have stuff sitting there that you think, hey, I need to deal with this, then I'd encourage you to think about at least writing an unposted letter. So when I mean that, I mean start off with the date, start off exactly like you would write an actual letter, dear so-and-so, and then go into, this is how I was hurt or whatever. And I don't want to be prescriptive because we're all different. All of David's Psalms are different. Just start writing it. And often you'll find that, and I suggest strongly that you do this, you don't have to do it longhand, but there's a difference between typing and longhand. Typing is the same hand action. You press a key. Longhand, you actually have to think as you form the words. And that's a ritual action in this case. Ritual is an action that has meaning, and we don't know why, or I've not found anything that satisfied my curiosity on it, that doing something with ritual often moves what's in here to out here. So I'd just recommend that. And you say, well, what do I do with the letter? I remember different people talking about what they did. One guy absolutely loved the sea. Grew up beside it, loved the sea. So he wrote what he wanted to deal with, wrote it down, took it down to the ocean, threw it into the ocean, stood there, the waves took it out. My naughty sense of humour said I hope he used soluble ink, but anyway, the wave took it out and he watched it. He stood there and he watched it, and as he did, he released it. Somebody else I know, same sort of work, but they loved the bush, so they went to their favourite campsite, lit the fire, sat beside it, held it, slowly dropped it in the fire, watched it burn, and released it. Two other instances which were very similar. One person said, I just screwed it up, chucked it in the toilet, flushed it. They said because, and I did not keep a straight face, they said because that was a really crappy part of my life and it belonged with the rest of the crap. So for them, that was a ritual. It was releasing it. Another one very similar that I just loved was somebody that said, I did this, I wrote it, finally got where I got to the point where I thought, I think I've got it all out. I think it's all on the paper. They took it out and they buried it under their favourite rose. Because they saw it very much like the other person that threw it down the toilet. This was a crappy part of my life. I'm taking this, I'm burying it because crap makes really good fertiliser. Putting it under my favourite rose, and I saw that as taking something that was pretty horrible and turning it into something beautiful. So I would suggest that if you have this stuff sitting in the background, that you take that and you try working through this. Sorry, I've got a whole lot of other stuff and I knew I had too much, and I'm trying to work out, hey God, where do you want me to go now? I'm just going to touch very briefly on parents. I'm a parent. Confession, I've stuffed up as a parent. If you're a parent, the bad news is you have too. No perfect parents. The thing to do about that is to be honest about it. And I'd suggest if your kids are old enough, you sit down and you have a chat with them about how you've stuffed up as a parent. Talk about it, be open about it. Ask them how you've stuffed up. I was very surprised. One of my boys was incredibly gracious towards me when I had this conversation in McDonald's. I thought he'd come out with a toilet paper roll list. Well, Dad, I can remember. And he didn't. He mentioned something. We talked about that. I'd just encourage us as parents, when your kids are old enough, just have a chat about how you've messed up. And incidentally, it might not be as bad as you think, because I remember a conversation with my eldest daughter. She won't mind me talking about it, right? I said to her, I want to apologise for when you were a little girl, very small, we were sitting in church, you were misbehaving. I did what my father used to do. You were misbehaving. I took you out, I smacked your bottom, and I took you back in. And I said, the moment I did that, I knew I'd done the wrong thing. And I said, I really want to apologise for doing that. She looked me in the eye and she said, Dad, I don't even remember it. I said, How dare you? I've been sweating drops of blood over this. I just want to encourage us as parents. I also want to encourage you that if your parents did hurt you, honour the office that they hold and hold them accountable for what they've done. Years ago I had to preach on honour your mother and father, and I had heard some pretty horrendous stories about parents. And I went before the Lord and I said, Lord, you said this, but with the stuff that I know, how do I speak about this? And at that time there was a magistrate who had run a red light. So he's a judge, runs a red light, gets pinged, gets the letter in the mail, signs a stat dec saying it wasn't me driving, but it was. Dumb guy was a dead person's name he put on that was driving. Police go, yeah, right, that's not right. So they arrest him, perjury, comes up before a judge. And the judge says, I'm not going to hold you so much accountable as a driver that ran a red light. I'm going to hold you accountable as a magistrate for betraying his position. You're going to jail. When we're dealing with our parents, if you've been raised in a church setting and you're told that you've got to honour your parents, that can become confusing when your parents are abusive. My take on that now is we are to hold our parents accountable for the office they hold. That's not disrespecting them. That is actually showing respect for the office they hold. So I just want to acknowledge that if you've been sort of trapped in this place of, well, I know my parents did some pretty horrible stuff to me, but I can't do anything about that because I've got to honour them. No. I'd encourage you to work through that in whatever way you need to. Now, I think I probably need to stop there. I was going to touch on Jesus, because he's sort of my hero. I was going to touch on the way that he exercised his authority. How much time have I got? Am I okay? Yeah. All right. Feel free to walk out and get a cuppa if you need to, all right? Right. Because there is something else I really did want to touch on, and this comes back to David. The ripple effect of somebody abusing their power can be absolutely horrendous. When I was first asked to speak on this, which incidentally, Wayne, was the day that you gave your testimony, which, great, thanks for that. And when I was asked to speak on this, I thought, I wonder what Wayne's dad would say about this, given what he went through, being arrested, etc., and the trauma that I imagine that he went through. But anyway, there was one, when I was asked, I went to my two daughters, lovely young ladies, magnificent like their mum. I said to them, I've been asked to speak about trauma and authority. Where would you go in the Bible? They both immediately said David and Bathsheba. Yeah. David and Bathsheba. David should have been his king. Saul's dead. David's king. He's wandering around the palace board. Should have been out on the battlefield. There's a lesson for leaders in that. Won't go there. He sees Bathsheba bathing on the roof. And he goes, oh, I wouldn't mind a bit of that. Excuse the language, but that's pretty much the gist. So he says to his guys, hey, there's a lass out there, go and get her. And they say, hey, mate, she's married. She's married, don't go there. And he goes, no. So they bring her in, he abuses her, and then finds out she's pregnant. He then tries to cover that up by having her husband murdered on the battlefield. Absolutely horrendous stuff. And I just want you to sit with that for a minute. That young guy starts off and ends up there. What happens then is Nathan the prophet comes along, as I mentioned earlier, tells David this story about a rich man stealing a poor man's lamb. David says, and this is how blind we can all be, David says, I'm going to have that man, that rich guy. How dare he steal the poor man's lamb? And Nathan says, you're the man. You're the man. To give David credit, he doesn't do what Saul had done years before and go, oh, it wasn't me, it was my men made me do this, when Samuel confronted Saul about disobeying the Lord. David could have said, oh, well, the victim blaming thing, well, you didn't see her on the roof, mate. He could have done the whole pass the buck, and to give David credit, he goes, guilty as charged, no excuse. I just wish that when he had written Psalm 51, that he had not only said, against God have I sinned, but he had also written against Bathsheba and Uriah. He leaves that out. I wished he had put it in. So there's David was abused, then Bathsheba was abused by people in positions of authority. If you've been in that position, there's a whole lot of people in the Bible that are in that situation. Hagar in the early days with Sarah's maid, abused by power, right through to Paul in the New Testament, abused by people in power. You're not on your own. So I probably do need to finish there. I will finish with this. If you have written a letter and you think I'd like to dispose of it with ritual, but you don't know what to do, I'd suggest that you take a candle and you do this solemnly in respect of what you've got on the paper. And you take a bit of time, you light a candle. And the reason that I like to use a candle is because a candle sheds light into dark places, brings light into dark places. Now, I was going to burn a bit of paper, but I thought we might have the fire brigade on the doorstep, which would sort of destroy the moment, if I haven't already. So what I would do, I would take the paper, hold it over the flame, light the corner, hold it, let it burn, drop it into something that's safe. And as the smoke rises from it, I would be simply praying, Father God, I'm releasing this as incense. And then when it felt right, and I wouldn't rush this, when it felt right, I'd then extinguish the flame.